got these properties, but I still am not confident that I can replace my salary, that I can quit my job.
You should prioritize and optimize your lifestyle. What are the essential properties within your portfolio that could get you to your income goal? Reposition that equity into a property that can produce better cash flows. That's basically the strategic selling strategy.
One of the things I think you and I do as real estate coaches, consultants, is that we help people take the wealth they have and they turn that into income that they can actually live off of. So replace your salary, whatever you want to call that. And I want to go deep on that today because we haven't talked enough about that, where let's say somebody is a little bit further along in their investing career. They've got multiple properties. They maybe have already built a good bit of equity. Maybe they have $1 million of equity, maybe more. And they're at the point though, they're like, all right, I've got this equity, I got these properties, but I still am not confident that I can actually live off of these properties, that I can replace my salary, that I can quit my job. So let's unpack the toolbox. Like how would somebody actually go about thinking about that transition from wealth to cash flow?
The main issue is not financial. Actually, like it's not a mathematical problem or a financial problem trying to figure out whether there's enough money or there's enough equity or how to turn it into yield. It's really more of a mindset shift, to be honest with you. Like when you shift from a builder phase to a harvester phase, it's a completely different job, right? Like it's when you're building, your skills are all about taking prudent risk and growing your portfolio and getting deals and buying deals and 1031ing into more properties. And so you're doing all this activity, and now you're going to try to shift from that into more of a yield phase. And it's just a very different job that requires very different skills. But in my opinion, I think most people who struggle with the harvesting phase is they're not mentally ready yet to shift to that phase, because the things that you have to optimize for in that phase are very different than the things that they've been optimizing for during their building period.
Do you think it's a fear that people have? Like I'm just thinking about my own situation and also people I've talked to. It's like, there's the classic moving of the goalpost. Like, oh, well, it's just a little bit more, just a little bit more. Like, is it maybe just a kind of innate fear that we have that we don't have enough? Like, well, yeah, I'm gonna turn off the faucet of income, and all of a sudden I'm not gonna have enough, and I'm gonna live in poverty, and I'm gonna run out of money before I die. Like, is it that kind of thing?
That's part of it, but that's the surface reason. Right. The deeper reason is that, you're really moving now from, you've been in this lane where you were originally uncomfortable, right? Like trying to figure out going from that starter phase where like you don't have any capital and, you're trying to figure out how to grow your business. And then you get into this lane where now you're building, you're working, like the capital comes easier, the deals sort of kind of fall in your lap because you're just getting experience with it. And now you've been in this lane for many years and you're comfortable at it, and you get things from it that aren't just financial. You get the thrill of putting deals together and finding deals and solving problems. And that's very, very exciting. It's similar to, I would say, to the shift from, let's say, when you've been working in a really high powered job for 40 years and now you're going to retire. That requires, initially you think, oh yeah, that'd be great. We'll go fishing. We'll go, I can wake up whenever I want, but it's a much more challenging transition because it's just a very different, environment. So there's a few reasons why people get stuck or they feel like they want to stay in the builder phase. One of them is that, that they're not really ready to let go. Like they have an emotional attachment to all their accomplishments that they've been able to do during their builder phase. So it's like all these properties, yes, they're investments, but they're part of your life narrative, right? Like this was the deal that, that negotiation was really hard for you, but you still were able to put it together. So you've got an emotional attachment to that deal. So you're not ready to let it go. So when I speak to a lot of clients that are struggling with this, a lot of them try to straddle the fence. They're like, well, harvest but also grow? And can I still buy, like if a deal comes around, like at the very depth of it is they're not really ready to, like, because it feels like you're going home, taking your chips and going home, and they're not ready to go home yet.
Yeah, this would be the equivalent. I always use a football metaphor. This would be like you're winning in the third quarter, and you use this classic strategy that coaches use where they start taking a knee. They just don't want to take
Right.
any risk. They're like, you know what? We're not even going to run a play. We're just going to quarterback's going to snap the ball and just take a knee. And think how ridiculous that would feel like in the beginning of the third quarter to start taking
Right.
knees every time because you're winning 100-0 or something, right?
Right.
It would feel ridiculous, but that's kind of the psychological. That's probably the right thing to do if you never want to take a risk, but it's so counter to what we're doing. I get it. Like I'm not criticizing that. I think that's I agree with those people.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, there are definitely trade-offs, and there's definitely, it's a totally new game. It's like you're a starter again, but in the harvesting phase, right? And that's uncomfortable. Like it feels like you're just, like you feel like you should be almost done, but yet you're now starting with something that has its own challenges. Like, granted, the problems are a lot more mental and a lot easier to overcome once you figure out that that's what's going on.
Yeah.
So it's not the same as the problems when you were just, it's like, hey, I'm trying to put deals together, but I don't have any capital. How do I do that? Like, that's a lot harder to figure out. But it's more about like getting out of your comfort zone and figuring out that that's really what you want, is to now go into this harvesting phase and turn equity into cash flow.
Yeah, we're gonna get into some specific strategies that actually are harvester phase strategies, like paying off debt, selling properties, things like that. But I want to give one idea that this kind of helped me mentally, Arion, to see what you think about this one. It's basically putting my portfolio into multiple buckets. And you have your whole portfolio is your whole portfolio, but like mentally, I say, all right, this part of my portfolio, I call it like I borrowed this idea from somebody else, but it's like an income floor. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting like a castle around this part of my portfolio, and this is my lower risk harvester. I'm not trying to optimize for growth. I'm just trying to optimize for low risk income cash flow, so that I have a certain amount of money coming in, and I know it's there. I know it's going to happen. And then I have another part of my portfolio mentally that is continuing to grow, still has leverage, and so I am trying to have my cake and eat it too, but I'm mentally doing that by having buckets. Is that something you ever thought about or seen other people do?
So I've seen people do that when they're sort of on the tail end of their building phase, but they're not ready to. They're ready to start harvesting some, but not to go into a full harvester phase. And that makes a lot of sense. It's almost, it's like a try before you buy kind of thing, to see how you feel, and what that's like for you, because that's been like I've had clients that have moved into this phase pretty effortlessly, because that's really what they wanted deep down. It's they wanted to get to this point where the portfolio just sort of runs itself and throws off cash, and you can live on it. And their main goal was lifestyle more than anything else. And I've seen people that basically go into the harvester phase and say, well, that's not really what I want to do. Like, I really want to chase that thrill of buying and acquiring. Like, I really love that part of it. And that's okay too. Like, I mean, this is your game,
Yeah,
right? Like, there's nothing that you're supposed to do. There's not a path that you're supposed to follow. You can do whatever you want to do. It's just, you have to be honest with yourself about what you want.
agreed. Yeah, and I think the people who meet that archetype, which I resonate with, is maybe you're a little bit younger in life and you've done well, or maybe you're later in life, but you're like, I'm just not ready to stop working. I still, the big takeaway I want people to have in this first part of the episode is the psychology of taking chips off the table. At least take some chips off the table. Like
Right.
that's what's worked for me, is just have at least, maybe it's half, maybe it's a third of your portfolio, where you're like, this amount of equity I'm going to turn into my conservative income floor. I'm
Right.
going to harvest this equity. And then I can still, if I still want to work and make income and active income, cool. But when you finally know that you have that ender portfolio, that harvester portfolio supporting you, and you could quit your job or you could quit your business at any point, it is a game changer. Like it totally reverses the risk of going to work. You can, if somebody says, hey, you got to do this thing, your boss says you got to do this thing, you're like, well, actually, I don't want to do that thing. I want to go do it this way. And that's totally fine that you want to do it that way, boss. But I'm just telling you, like, I don't need the money.
Right.
So I'm willing to do it this way, or I'm not willing to do it at all. And it gives you a ton of life negotiating leverage when you finally take those chips off the table.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the critical points here is, like I said, it's your game. You can choose to do whatever you want. But once you realize what it is that you really want, then you should probably stop torturing yourself about the thing that you say to yourself that you want. So what I mean is, if you are really a builder and you're not ready to stop being a builder and become a harvester, stop torturing yourself about saying like, well, my problem is I really don't know how to convert this into cash. It's like, no, that's not really what you're trying to do. So either, figure out how to build these skills and tools to move into that phase, or realize that that's not really what you want to do. And either way, it's fine. Just don't kind of straddle this fence and keep torturing yourself over that transition.
Yep. All right. So we've got this journey: starter, builder, harvester. I've talked about this on other episodes. And there's a psychological component of this, and then there's the practical component. So
Right.
we've kind of covered some of the psychological, which I agree 100% is probably the hardest part of the transition for many people. The second part is surprisingly is can be, the tactics can be a little bit easier. They're not always, they're pretty simple to understand. So maybe could we start unpacking some of what are some of the tactics you would use if you say I've got this big chunk of equity but I can't live off of it yet? Like what would be some of the things you would start discussing with a real estate investor to start tapping into that equity?
Yeah, so once we're moving into the tactical side, the very first thing that I would do is a portfolio review, right? So I would look at their current portfolio and analyze it, but not just from the financial standpoint, which is very important, like looking at things like what's your return on equity, which properties in your portfolio are your top performers and which ones are the laggards, which properties you'd be happy owning forever and which ones you're like, I could live without that one. So that's very, very important. But you also need to look at it from the perspective of risk. So what I mean by that is income reliability, because like once you move into the harvester phase, it's just as important how much income the properties are making as to how reliable that income is, right? If you have a property that might be older or might have like chronic maintenance issues that could wipe out cash flow, that's very disruptive in the harvester phase, because then you're really relying on that income. It's very different like when you're in the builder phase, and especially if you're not relying on the income to live on, you know, you don't like it if your AC goes out and $4,000 are out the door, but it's a very different crisis when you're relying on that income and you're counting on it to come every month. So you have to look at the reliability of income, and then you have to look at what I call the experience of ownership, or like the brain damage factor, right? Like you want to look at it in terms of like how much of a hassle is that property? Like, every portfolio has their 20% of the properties that give you 80% of the problems. So you need to figure out like, from that perspective, is that property worth keeping? Because now, if you're truly moving into a harvester phase, you should prioritize and optimize your lifestyle, right? You shouldn't, try to run this like a business. It should be more of a passive investment, as much as real estate can be passive, right? So those are some of the perspectives that I would analyze, because that's what informs all the decisions that follow and all the sort of strategies that follow.
Yeah, I agree 100%. This is something my business partner and I did. We sort of transitioned into the harvester phase back in 2017. So
Okay.
it's 2025 now, but we were getting ready to go to Ecuador for a year and a half. And we wanted to, I felt like for a while there, we had enough equity, but it was like we got out of the recession and I was nervous and I was I was like, I don't know about this. I want to keep kicking the can a little bit. But finally, going on a mini retirement, we were like we actually want to harvest some of the equity and live off of it. And one of the things we did for several years was just get our portfolio and really good spreadsheets and just start analyzing things. And I did the same. I have kind of a few different lenses I used. One was financial, like how much money are these properties making, how much cash flow, how much equity. So that's pretty straightforward. It's important too. But then I also looked at return on brain damage type analyses, which is a little more, fuzzy. But if you look at it, like what we would do is we'd make a list of all of our properties and we would rank them Like the best rankings would be the ones we want to keep, the worst would we want to sell. And the ones we wanted to sell had things like just recurring maintenance issues, which we might never realize up front, but just became an ongoing factor. For example, we had a couple properties that had just a ton of trees around them, and they were always dumping leaves on the branches were falling all the time. Every time there's a storm, a tree is falling on it. And yes, you could have insurance, but then you have the deductibles. And I had other properties with septic tanks, and that it was okay for what it was for a while, but you had to go pump it all the time, and then the fields, the drain fields would get damaged, and you had to like fix those. And so it was basically, we did a pruning of our portfolio, which we're going to talk about selling and how to, when it's the right time to sell. But we made a hit list basically of saying like, all right, our whole portfolio is like a big fruit tree. We want to start pruning off the branches that have a little bit of disease or that are like less than ideal or that are just a hassle. And we did it by return on brain damage, maintenance cost, and also reliability of income. So that there's just some properties, for whatever reason, sometimes it was because the property had a bad layout, sometimes the location was bad, it just didn't attract the best long-term tenants.
Right.
And so that income on paper looked pretty good, but there was a big gaps. We had vacancies, and we had bad tenants, and people didn't pay on time. And it's like, why is that? Like, we've done the same exact tenant screening we did on this one as we did on another one, and yet this one has vacancies all the time. And the only way you'll know this is by having good books and having good records. But by doing that, you can start ranking your properties and saying, all right, these 6 properties got to go. The numbers are pretty good, but they got to go. And then you start culling it, or you start pruning it from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of the small and mighty investor. It's basically, you're optimizing for simplicity, right? So to take Greg McKeown's idea of essentialism, you're basically trying to figure out what are the essential properties within your portfolio that could get you to your income goal. Because if you can do it with 5, then you shouldn't do it with 10 or 15 or 25, right? So you're trying to, again, optimize for lifestyle. So you're trying to simplify things. So you are, yes, you want the properties that produce the most cash flow, but adjusted for the hassle factor and the risk and the reliability of income.
Yep. Got it. All right. So step 1, do a portfolio analysis, either on your own or having other people help you look at it. That's step number 1. What would you do from there?
So as part of that portfolio analysis, what you want to figure out is there enough net operating income in your portfolio to get you to your goal, right? Because if there isn't, then you're really not done building yet, right? So you want to make sure that, like, let's say if your goal is $120,000 a year in income and your net operating income is $90,000, then if you ended up paying off all your properties, all they would produce is $90,000, right? So you're not really going to get to your goal with that. So that's the very first thing. The second thing is, if the net operating income is there, then what you need to figure out is, okay, how much time do we have, right, to get from the building phase to the harvester phase? Because obviously one of the easier things to do is basically like, hey, pay everything off. That reduces the loan to value to 0, reduces the risk, simplifies things. If you have a vacancy, you're not happy about it, but you're not losing sleep because there's no mortgage to pay every month. But depending on the number of properties that you have, if you've got 10 properties and they're all leveraged, that may take a few years, right? So if it takes you 10 years, you're like, well, I'm not ready to be retired in 10 years. I want to be retired in 5. Then that sort of informs what the substitute strategies are or alternative strategies are.
Yeah, agreed. I was going to go back to analyzing your net operating income. So one of the things I see this pretty common area, and maybe you've seen this too, is that you have people who are in the starter phase, the builder phase. They bought these properties, they use leverage. They were in Austin, Texas, or they were in California or
Right.
Greenville, South Carolina, and the equity really outruns the income of the property. So they might have one property that has $500,000 in equity, but the rent on that property is a couple $1,000, and it produces like a few $100 a month in cash flow leveraged. And even if you paid it off, it would be like $1,000. But like if you had it paid off free and clear, that property would still only produce like a 3% or a 2% yield on the total equity they have in that property. And so I find that to be pretty common, is that as portfolios mature, you got a ton of equity on properties that have grown really well, but they don't produce a lot of cash flow for that equity. So maybe could you speak to that a little bit? Because that might be somebody they look at they're like, I don't have enough NOI yet right now. I don't have enough net operating income. What would be a move to make if I have a lot of equity but not much cash flow?
Well, I mean, that would be similar. Like you have to figure out like what job each property is performing in the portfolio. So for a kind of ridiculous example is like if you could hire Warren Buffett, right? You don't want to hire Warren Buffett to cut your grass, right? Like
Yeah.
you want to hire him to be your investment partner or your investment advisor if you could hire him, right? So the idea is, if you have a property that is an equity juggernaut, right? That goes up in value, but the rents go up in value at a much slower pace, then you don't want to hire that property to cut your yard, meaning to produce cash flow for you. You want to use it to like go as high as it can go and then reposition that equity into a property that can produce better cash flow. So that's basically the strategic selling strategy where you say, hey, this property, the strength of this property is in the equity that it's built, and maybe it's kind of run its course. Like, yeah, it might go up a little bit more, but this is kind of where as far as it's going to go. So it might be good to sell that property and 1031 into a property that, or even a higher asset value that can increase your net operating income, produce more cash flow for you, maybe something newer, maybe something in an area where the price to rent ratios are more favorable, since now you're prioritizing cash flow at this stage.
Yep. So the job to be done, that's kind of the main paradigm here, is that some properties are more growth oriented properties. Some locations are more growth oriented locations. Some are more hybrids. Like I'm in South Carolina where I am, we have some hybrid locations where we've had pretty good, 3-4% growth per year, also have a decent cash flow ratio. But what we're saying here is you have to like ask yourself, what's the job I need? And this is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where that psychology comes back in, because you've had this property and it's grown a lot, and it might be in a really good location. It might even be a location that's going to do really well over the next 10 years. And you've got to ask yourself, like, am I okay sacrificing the future growth of this property so that I can take some chips off the table and make cash flow today? And
Right.
that's a tough question.
Right. And it's also, you have to figure out also like, as far as your portfolio is concerned, has that property done its job already? Like, is the mission finished? Like, if the mission's finished, like not every property is meant to be held forever, right? Like, and this is coming from somebody who, like, I believe the property, real estate's to be held, not to be sold, right?
Yeah, me too.
But ultimately, real estate in the context of investing for financial freedom is there so that it can get you financial freedom. So once the mission is done, then take your chips off the table and, go and do something with it that can help that mission and help your lifestyle.
Yeah, and this is where it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. Going back to like my buckets, so I have
Right.
a certain number of properties. So if you had 10 properties or 20 properties, back to like pruning your portfolio, you might have made a list, and out of the 20 properties you have, 5 or 6 of them are on the prune list, and you're like, okay, those need to be sold. But they also might have grown a lot too. So even though they were a hassle, even though they had a lot of trees, it might be in a beautiful neighborhood with a lot of growth potential, but you're just like, that job of that property's been done. It's grown enough. It doesn't produce much cash flow. I'm going to sacrifice these 5 properties, and then I'm going to use them to kind of get me to the next level. And
Exactly.
let's talk about what that is. Like, so let's go down that line. Like, we do sacrifice those 5 properties, we sell them, we're going to reposition that equity. What does that look like to get from that point A to point B?
Well, so there's a couple of things. One is, before you make the transition into the harvester phase, you want to position your portfolio, right, to best perform in that phase, right? Meaning, like, now that you're not building anymore, now that your appreciation matters less to you than cash flow, then what you should do is, before you enter that phase, you want to figure out, like, is the portfolio as good as it can be for that phase, right? So that might mean sort of a flurry of moves and repositioning your assets, and maybe refreshing the age of your portfolio, like you were mentioning, pruning. Like, you're taking out some of the older branches that have kind of done their job already, and you're buying some properties that are newer. So that's the very first thing. The second thing is, I always advise clients to do a 6 month like dry run or audition for the harvester phase, right? Because again, the grip of the paycheck is strong, right? Like the idea, the level of security, financial security and peace of mind that comes from, hey, first on the 15th this check always hits my bank account, it's very, very strong, right? So what you want to do is, before you let go of that, what you want to do is you want to try to pretend like the paycheck is not there, like maybe send that to some savings account somewhere, and then just live off of your property's income for 6 months to see what that's like, and hopefully to experience some of the variability that could kind of give you heartburn while you're living off of the properties. So that would be the um, but that's like once the portfolio has been repositioned already. But I think your question was more about like, okay, well, now that we figured out like we're gonna sell some properties, what do we do with the equity? Well, there's a couple of options. One is you can say, okay, if the properties that I'm planning on keeping give me the level of income that I need to live off of, then it's more of a sell some, pay off others kind of strategy, right? Where you can take that equity, essentially pay the taxes on the money, and then use the after tax money to pay off the remaining properties that you have, or as many of them as you can. And then if there's any left, then you can use the income for some time to kind of get those paid off. If you need to replace those properties with others, then it could be a um, kind of like that Michael Jordan special, like the Last Dance. Like you can go on a last dance of acquisition and sell your properties and buy some maybe bigger properties, newer properties that can really do the job of supporting you in during your harvesters phase a little bit better.
Yeah. So it might be I had a student of mine who sold a property in Austin, Texas that was older, that didn't produce a lot of income. And then maybe you transfer that, $500,000 or $1 million equity into a different market that has a little bit different cash flow
Exactly.
profile. And then a newer property, maybe it's a new construction property, turnkey, instead of an older, high
Exactly.
maintenance kind of property.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So we're pruning, we're selling, we're either replacing them with something else that has a different profile, or we're just doing the thing that real estate investors say we're never supposed to do, which is actually pay taxes on it. We pay taxes on it, and if it makes
Blasphemous, I
sense, right?
know.
And you're a heretic area, and you're not going to be, they're not going to let you into the real estate exchanger rooms if you keep talking
Yeah,
like that.
I'm
But
fine with it.
yeah, it works, right? At some point, this is where that psychology comes back in. It's like you're not trying to optimize growth, you're trying to optimize your lifestyle, and there's a different, you're playing a different game. You're not using the same rules. But I found selling properties has been a really important part of my strategy. I'm a buy and hold person. I love buy and hold. The properties that are my back row, kind of back row of the chessboard kind of properties,
Hmm.
I don't want to sell those, but the pawns, the ones that are expendable, it can really accelerate it. Because like you talked about earlier, if you wanted to get down where you like reduce a lot of debt on your portfolio, just doing a debt snowball where you just like save all your cash and pay it off is great. I love that tool, but it could take you like 10, 12 years to do this,
Yes,
start from scratch and pay it off. But if you want to accelerate that by overbuying a little bit, buying it more than you need, and then selling a few, can accelerate it. Because even if it doesn't pay off all your properties, you can pay off 3 or 4 of them. Now you freed up some more cash flow. Now you got it. You can use that extra cash flow to pay off another 1 or 2. And you might get to a point where you have like half your properties paid off and you have plenty of cash flow, and you're good. Like you can kind of measure that by accelerating it a little bit, by combining strategies of selling
right,
plus debt snowballs.
exactly.
So is there any other ideas or tips we would have in terms of like the tactics from getting from that I'm in a stage with a lot of equity, not much cash flow, to the point where I can actually live off of it?
Well, yes. I mean, you could switch property classes completely, right? So you could go from, you know, I mean, we always talk about how residential real estate, whether it be single family or small multifamily or multifamily, is a great tool to sort of build your portfolio and build your equity positions. But it comes with like operationally, it's a lot more involved, right? Then, so if you're optimizing for simplicity and low brain damage and stuff like that, it's not ideal in that phase. So one option could be, you and this could pacify some of the tax blasphemy people. One of the things that you could do is sell your residential properties and 1031 them into, say, like a commercial triple net type of asset that has long-term leases, 20-25 year leases, with credit with credit tenants, which that's the number one most important thing in that strategy.
So
um,
you're renting to a S&P 500 index or
yeah,
S&P 500
like a
company.
Dollar General,
Yeah.
or something like that, like a well-known company with sort of airtight leases. And you could have a what they call going dark clauses on their leases, where even if they close that store, they still have to pay you for 25 years. I mean, there's risks with that as well, but because they're triple net leases, you're kind of insulating yourself from increases in property taxes, increases in insurance, the possibility that rents might go down, times when vacancy goes up. Like you basically like wash your hands of those problems and really simplify your life. Another way to do this is to basically shift from being an investor to being a lender. So you could, one way to do that would be to take the capital and put it out to pasture to work for you. One of the issues with that is usually like keeping the capital working all year round. It can be complicated. Like you could put the money in and 6-7 months and it's paying you a really great rate of return, but then it's like it might take you 4 or 5 months to find the next investment, so really the money wasn't working during that period of time. So one solution for that strategy would be to um, essentially go from being the investor that owns the property to being the lender by selling it with seller financing to
Mm-hmm.
somebody. And you're accomplishing essentially the same thing as with the commercial real estate strategy, because you don't pay taxes anymore, you don't pay insurance anymore, and you basically can boost yield by the fact that the mortgage that you have, or your mortgage position that you have, is much lower than the mortgage that you would lend out to the other person. So even if because when I explain this to investors, they say, well, if I'm going to lend it out at 5.5 or 6% to the investor, like that doesn't seem like very nice yield. But the 5.5 on a $400,000 mortgage, you know, uh, is actually a 7.5 if your capital in it is 200,000 or 250, right? So you can really boost yield that way.
Yeah, people need to actually like pause that and run the numbers on that, what you just said, because this is a strategy I've done a good bit of. This has been one of my favorite ways to harvest. I've had several harvester phases. Back in 2009, I went through a little mini harvester phase where we were just trying to recover from our overbuying before the Great Recession started. Like we bought a bunch of properties in 2007, and then we held on by the skin of our teeth in 2008 and 9, and we finally stabilized things by 2009. And one of the ways we stabilized it was by selling off 15, 16 properties with seller financing, exactly
Right.
what you're talking about. And we created income streams from that. Some of which we're still collecting today, 2025. It's amazing. They're still going. But the cool thing about that for us is we would finance it at or a little bit above market rate. So like if the market rate was 6%, we were probably at 7.5, sometimes 8%, depending on because often our buyers were our tenants, and they put 10% down instead of 20% down. So it's kind of equivalent if they were to go out and have to get, subprime loan or something that was a little bit, not a 20% down loan. But the benefit for them was they already lived in the house. We're turning a renter into a homeowner. And that's a big deal. Like that for them to
Right.
be able to get into a house without having to go to the bank and use their full credit, it was a win-win in that respect. And for us, these are often the properties that I wanted to prune off anyway, and so maybe they're okay, cutting back the trees and doing that kind of stuff, and this
Right.
is their first home. They love buying this home, and so for me, it got kind of that hassle off my plate, and then it turned the equity that I had in that property from a rental property into a note, which for me, often my best returns were on these notes that I created. Like I sometimes had 12, 15, 25, 30% returns and higher because I was still, because I still have some leverage in some cases, but even if I owned them free and clear, they were really good investments because I essentially owned that property at a discount. So I sold it for full value, but I
Yeah.
was in it for like 60% or 70%. So the 6% interest rate or 7% interest rate that they were paying on my costs was maybe, 10, 12, 13%. So
Right.
it's a really interesting deals.
Yeah. The thing though is that in order to do that, because some of the pushback that I get with that strategy is people say, well, but if the property goes up in value, now I don't get a benefit of that. And it's like, that's
Exactly.
the letting go part, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like you're getting the yield and you're now the lender. And yes, you do lose some things, right? Like you lose the depreciation, now that the money is taxable and so on. But, you get a lot of additional benefits that really fit this phase of your um, of your investing. Now, what's funny now is like typically when people do seller financing, you're essentially in a kind of in a lower interest rate environment and you're lending money at, above market rates. Now it's the reverse. Like we're working with a client right now about potentially offering people like a lower than market rate, which would still be a great return for the investor because the investor financing was at 2 point whatever percent
Yeah.
from 2020. So it's, there's interesting creative ways to get that done.
Yeah, when you start studying the financing, I think it seems like an advanced level type investor thing to do. But for people who are harvesting their equity, when you finally unlock being the bank and understanding financing and having arbitrage of financing, it's like taking the orange pill in the Matrix. Sorry, is it orange or I can't forget what color it was. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, you take the
Red.
pill in the Matrix and you learn you go down this rabbit hole of learning like, oh wow, like there's a whole another world of real estate investing that has a lot of creativity, has a lot of returns. And this is where it could be a lot of fun. Like as a harvester myself, like I'm out of the phase of like doing a bunch of acquisitions, of being the person who's managing the properties myself, outside of a few that I self manage. But I love being the bank, and I love also, in addition to seller financing, I'm also doing another kind of corollary strategy, which is being the money for other builder investors or sometimes starter investors. So I have just a small group of people who I trust and I know really well. And so they might need the capital for a deal that they can't chew off themselves. And we put up the money for that deal. And that's been, for me, it's almost like venture capital or, being an angel investor where
Yeah.
I get to be behind the scenes, advising, helping, they get feedback from me, and then they get my money or my business partner's money. And we get to be more passive, which is what we want at this stage. So I guess that'll be my message to people who are in this stage. Like there are a lot of tools in your toolbox that you can use, but you gotta think about the benefits you have are capital that you've accumulated, the wisdom you have of like doing deals together. But you got, if you're willing to network and meet people and connect with people and have a network of other investors, there's a ton of opportunities where you can be the money and the advisor for other people and have a really super strong win-win relationship.
Yeah, and generally, like when you're in your builder phase, there's a certain like patterns that you've been working on for many years. So it's like it's almost like when you learn how to drive, and sometimes you realize like you're not even paying attention, but somehow you get home, right? Because it's just the patterns already established. This requires a moment of pause where you sort of it's like a choosing moment, right? Like you've got to basically say, "Hey, I'm choosing to make this shift," and then once you consciously make that choice, then everything that we've discussed in this episode kind of flows from that. It's like, yes, you do want to simplify things. Yes, you want to make it so that it's more reliable and lower risk and more supporting of your lifestyle. Like you don't want to be in Europe and it's like you're getting calls about like that's not the point of this thing. Like you're trying to basically make it where it's like, okay, I got my kicks out of building it. I build these wonderful skills of putting properties together and acquiring. Now it's the time to sort of live off of that, all that hard work from all those years. And now we're playing a different game.
So we've talked about the psychology of this transition from having wealth and living off of it. We've talked about some of the tactics, and we've talked about selling properties. We've talked about analyzing your portfolio comprehensively, looking at different properties, having some that you want to have on a hit list that you might prune off. We've talked about selling the properties and becoming more of a lender in some cases, or financing. We've talked about doing exchanges or maybe even changing asset classes. And eventually you get to this point where you do meet your goal. If you wanted $120,000 per year in cash flow from a lower risk portfolio, you have it. You're there, and you can pat yourself on the back. You can enjoy what you set out to do. Is there anything else we missed or that you would add to that, Arion, that people should think about if they're wanting to make that transition?
No, I think at that point, that's when you drink wine. That's the next step after that.
That's an important step. Yes, you got to actually enjoy it. One of my mentors, John Schaub, always when he first signed, he wrote a book, Building Wealth One House at a Time, and I met him at a seminar for the first time, and he signed my book, and he wrote, "Build wealth, enjoy it, share it." And I thought that was perfect, because a lot of people get stuck on the first part and they forget about, wait a minute, you need to enjoy it. You need to drink your wine, and you need to share it too, which I think such a not talked enough about as well. Is like, you've got the wisdom and the capital and the free time. So, what are you here to give? Like, what do you want to give back to? And that's, everybody's got their own way to do that, but man, it feels good to be able to bring other people up with you, or help other people in a way that maybe doesn't have, it's not a capitalist, I'm going to make a bunch of money off this thing I'm doing, but it's just like, no, this is something that makes my heart, my heart full. This is great.
It's very important, right? Because it's kind of like, the seasons of life where, if you're in your, 30s and 40s and let's say 50s, right? Like you're accomplishing things yourself. And then as you get older, then you sort of live and, kind of mentor your kids, and you sort of live through their successes, and you want to see them succeed. And, you become a father and a grandpa and so on. Right. So it's similar to that, in the sense that, like, that drive that we have to accomplish things cannot only be satisfied by buying properties. Like, it can be satisfied by becoming a resource and becoming a mentor and sharing your wisdom and kind of providing the playbook for somebody else, or the blueprint for somebody else, and kind of seeing them succeed. That you get that thrill. Like, that's your payoff for you, in addition to, your investment strategy, like accomplishing the thing that you set out for it to do that many years ago, right? So the sharing part of that quote is what hit me the hardest. Is like, that is the way that you can get your kicks and your thrills out of real estate at that stage.
Yeah, well said. Well, Arion, in the world of coaches and mentors, you're the best. You're the guy I talk to all the time to get my own feedback and exchange ideas and learn from. So thank you for doing this. I want to give you a chance to let people know, if they wanted to connect with you and your business as a broker, as a property manager, as an investment advisor, how would they get in touch with you?
I always love being here. They can connect with me on X at Invest Architect, on LinkedIn, or on my website at signaturehouston.com.
All right. I'll have links if you're looking at the show notes for the episode, or in the podcast or the YouTube description below. I'll have links to all that. Arion, it's been fun. Hoping to get to do it again soon.
Let's do it.
Arion and I just showed how maintenance can make or break your passive rental property cash flow. Yes, boring old maintenance makes all the difference. So in my next video, Matt, the lumberjack landlord, and I break down our favorite low maintenance upgrades for rental properties that save us money and that our tenants also love. We cover everything from our favorite durable materials to the best heating and air units. If you're watching on YouTube, click on the thumbnail above me here, or you can click on the link in the podcast or YouTube description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.